Well, hey, water fans. We are here to talk about cybersecurity changes for public water systems. And there are a bunch that have come up in 2023. And so we want to say hello to everybody. We can say good afternoon to everybody except Alaska and Hawaii, where good morning to you all. Um, so if you haven't joined our webinars before, I'm Jake Milstein. And we do a lot of panels, a lot of discussions based on regulatory changes, things happening in the cybersecurity world. And today, obviously, we're going to focus on water systems, and we have a special guest joining us. So, one thing to know: the chat is on the right. Hop on over there and say hi, and let us know where you're joining from. If there's a lot of ding ding dings over there, there's a little bell, and you can hit the slash on there and turn off your ding ding dings. Also, everybody who has registered will get a recording automatically from the system, and we'll send out the slide deck to folks as well. Um, if you have never met us before, we're Critical Insight. We defend critical infrastructure against cyber attack. And critical infrastructure is water systems, utilities, cities, counties. We help organizations prepare for a cyber attack with assessments, penetration tests, and the like, building an incident response plan. We help them detect an attack quickly with our security operations centers, and we help them respond decisively, either taking action on the network or with a full incident response team that includes forensics and all of that. But I will say that's not how we want to meet anybody. Don't we don't want to meet you at 1 a.m. when you call our 800 number. We'd love to get with you in the prepare and detect category before we're in the respond category. Today, Mike Hamilton is joining us. He is founder of the company, CISO, and former CISO of the city of Seattle, as is Bjorn Townsend, who's one of our senior consultants. He is on that IR team. So when you call at 1 a.m., you may get Bjorn. But more importantly for today's discussion, Bjorn has done a ton of work on water systems around the Pacific Northwest, and helping them become better protected and match the cybersecurity regulations that come out of local, state, and federal governments. We're also lucky enough today to be joined by Dan Irvin. Dan, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Jake. I've spent my entire career as a municipal water and wastewater system consultant, both as a designer and a planner. First two-thirds of that career were focused on automatic controls and facilities design and comprehensive planning. So I have a broad background in how water systems operate and how they're configured. And the last third of my career has been focused on all things surrounding emergency response. So cybersecurity is certainly embedded in that, earthquake early warning, facility assessments, emergency response plans, and we've prepared many emergency response plans and risk and resiliency assessments with CI security in compliance with AWIA requirements.
Awesome, and yeah, we've done a ton of work with Dan and work hand in hand with him and his team on a bunch of things. Today as we talk through this, Mike's going to talk through a bunch of things, and Dan and Bjorn are going to chime in the chat. Please chime in as well. Ask questions. My favorite thing to do is to interrupt them and ask questions. So, Mike, take it away.
Off we go. Okay, everybody hear me okay? Just make sure I'm not muting myself.
5x5.
Okay. So, really a lot of criminal activity right now. And a lot of the criminal activity, it was just really gray as to whether or not these are really criminals, are these state actors. And so here is a joint bulletin put out by CISA and I believe the FBI in 2021, talking about these three different treatment plants that were hit, and the actors had complete control of their SCADA systems. Well, they had control over the SCADA system. I can't say complete. Now, this was hushed up. This happened right around the time that the Oldsmar water facility had that incident where somebody was able to gain access to a system through their remote access channel, and was messing around and was able to up the amount of sodium hydroxide going into the water by 1,000% or something. Nothing like that was true. That is not what happened. And we knew it at the time. So that was not a criminal. That was not a terrorist. That was not a state actor. That was a doofus banging on a keyboard who eventually fessed up to the whole thing. That was not the real deal. This is the real deal. So now, were these ransomware gangs? Because this does not seem to be in the swim lane of criminals. Yes, if you can snarl that operation, you can extort it. Um, these days, there is not only a rhetoric coming out of the federal government that if you use ransomware against critical infrastructure, you are a terrorist, which is a bit of a deterrent. But let's face it, a water utility does not have records to steal. They can't do double extortion. They can't hold records in abeyance to say, look, okay, your insurance company says you're just going to put everything back together. If you don't pay us, we're going to make all this stuff public. There are no records. I mean, maybe a few W-2s for employees, but that's it. So that doesn't seem completely on brand for criminals to me. I'm just saying I have a little bit of a I don't know, uncertainty there
Skepticism.
as to whether that,
You are.
skepticism, uncertainty, whatever you want to call it. These things come out, and when they come out, especially from intelligence agencies and things like that, sometimes they're 4-hour consumption when they hit the public, and that may not be what is being talked about behind the scenes. So, go to the next slide. Let's talk about other problems. Countries. This is the one that's really ticking up. I haven't seen a whole lot of problems in water infrastructure from criminality. Right? We don't see about ransomware in water utilities. We don't hear about records theft. We don't hear about stuff like that. We hear about acts that are done out of aggression. The famous one was the one in Australia where a former employee took over some control systems and basically caused a whole lot of damage. And I think that was sewage treatment. So here's irrigation systems in Israel that were being hit by Iranians, presumably. I'm sure they did the attribution to that correctly. Ukraine's critical infrastructure getting hit, getting hit, getting hit, getting hit. Chinese are now starting to get into the infrastructure attacks, and we saw this. The one recently was focused on the island nation of Guam, because that is a key point for the United States to stage military and to conduct communications if there was ever an incident in Taiwan. So countries are getting into the infrastructure disruption game. And interestingly, it's being blamed on volunteers and activists and things like that. So it's really hard to attribute this to a state act, because if it's a state act, it's an act of war. If it's a criminal act, we treat that differently. So there's a lot of fuzziness around this. Wipers, we're starting to see those more. If wiper is not a familiar term, it's like ransomware. It'll hit your network, it'll encrypt everything, except there is no decryption key. You're not getting your data back. It just snuffs the life out of everything. And those are starting to appear with increasing and alarming frequency. There's a number
And
of them.
but they will still charge.
Indestroyer is called one.
But they will still charge you a ransom as if you can get your data back, and then
This is
disappear.
true. This is true. You're just
So,
not getting it back.
interestingly enough, an audit of the transactions on the Bitcoin wallets that they send and receive to, it's all publicly viewable because blockchain stuff.
Right.
They found that a lot of those wallets appeared to be inactive or no longer used. It was as if it was like they threw the wallet info on there just to make it look good, but they weren't actually expecting to get paid.
For the patina of believability, right?
Yeah.
So again, masquerading as a criminal to avoid being some act being labeled as this was done by a nation state. It's starting to get a little confusing and alarming out there. So clearly, the water sector probably needs to do something about this, because it looks like it's really coming our way. There are definitely activists out there. Killnet is a group of Russian activists. We don't know how affiliated they are with the state or with criminal gangs. I think they're closer to criminal gangs. but the tighter they get with those other communities, the more they can inherit some of the skills and get away from denial of service and website defacements and things like that, and really starting to hit infrastructure. Because I got to tell you right now, it doesn't make sense that volunteers have the key skills to go out and damage industrial control systems like we're starting to see done. That doesn't pan out. All right, go to the next slide, Jake. Okay, so in the ecosystem that is critical infrastructure protection, every critical sector, dams, water, finance, energy, health, has a number of pieces. There is a sector coordinating council, there is a government coordinating council. Usually they have an ISAC, an information sharing and analysis center, and they have a sector specific agency. So the sector specific agency for water is the EPA. And the EPA has regulatory purview, and they can use the rulemaking process to add to regulations. And up to this point, the EPA has historically never really regulated anything but water purity, right? Water quality. And now, with all of this stuff going on, they are really getting into this rulemaking process and starting to talk about the security of these systems. And what precipitated all this was the Colonial Pipeline attack of, what was it, 2 years ago. And when we found out that the TSA was the sector specific agency for pipelines, and the TSA had never communicated anything about security of their operational systems, operational technologies to pipelines, all of a sudden the hammer came down, and it's okay, all SSAs, right? You're going to have to up your game, and we're going to have to start doing sector specific plans again, because all that has gone fallow. Everybody's supposed to do a sector specific plan every couple of years. And I think water is the last one that came out was 2015, and possibly updated in 2020, but still essentially 2015. Okay, so using this rulemaking authority, they're talking about adding a cyber assessment. And the analog here is like other sector specific agencies, how they're doing this. So the United States Coast Guard is the sector specific agency for maritime ports. Maritime ports have always been required to do a facility security plan. So now the Coast Guard says, along with the thing that you've always had to do, we're adding this new piece to it, and you need to give us your cybersecurity assessment as part of your facility security plan every couple of years. So again, using existing regulatory authority and the rulemaking process to just add a little bit right there. Okay, so water is doing this right now. Okay, go to the next slide, Jake. Okay, rural water systems are okay. So this is a little self-serving. It's my own quote that came out in a piece yesterday. But there are a number of things that can go wrong here, and everybody wants to kind of glom onto that Oldsmar water thing that happened right before the Super Bowl, when it's like, ooh, you can change the level of chemicals in the water. Okay, that's true. There are safeguards though that detect that and actually would not let that. And Dan can comment on this because he knows in great detail how all this works. But there are safeguards in place so that you don't end up drinking pure sodium hydroxide. Okay, so that's great. But the kind of actor in the middle attacks, if you can get in the middle of, for example, remote telemetry, where you are measuring water levels in wells, surface water in streams, things like that, water pressure in places, and you can inject bad information, right? So you have upset the integrity of the information that you're using for your automation systems to make decisions. You can cause problems. Okay. And frankly, when we're talking about water is a problem if waste treatment is impacted, which is adjacent to the water sector and part of it. 3 days later, we have a health emergency, and we are scrambling into the emergency operations center to handle this as a regional disaster. That's how bad it will get, and how quickly.
And Mike, and so comment in the chat, and I think we can, answer this a little bit here. What about your average teenage delinquent in the middle of the night? Bjorn, is that really a thing?
I would say I would say I don't want to say no, it's not. but I would say that it is very unlikely. First of all, the barrier to entry as far as getting malicious traffic onto a water system in the first place would, in a lot of cases, at least here in Washington State, still be fairly high because there have been some protective measures taken. But then the other thing is that in order to truly do serious damage to a water system, you have to have a good idea of how that exact specific water system works, what its normal set points are, how it normally operates, how operators normally recover it from errors. All of this requires that the threat actors be resident and watching the activity in that system, and oftentimes even building a model of it, sometimes even a physical model of it, so that they can understand its behavior and discover ways to attack it. These are very complex systems. It's not the sort of thing that a teenager can find a how-to guide on. I'd say that they could probably do some destructive damage before it's noticed if they made it onto an OT network. But in terms of like crafting something sophisticated enough that it would allow the water system to lie to its operators in an effective way. The nightmare scenario that I always like to use, especially in summertime like this for tabletop exercises, is the attackers order all of your reservoirs to drain themselves and order the control systems to lie to you about the tank levels. So you don't have any idea that your reservoirs are empty until you physically go out there and see that there's the drain hatch is open. So I'd say that teenagers are probably not a likely scenario, or at least if they do make it onto the network, it's not the worst possible scenario, just because it takes actually a lot of concerted effort to figure out how to effectively control and damage a
And
water system.
and Dan, Twilight's follow-up here is, what about rural water system tanks, specifically without fences? I mean,
Well, if people are physically breaking into the system, they're obviously going to be able to cause physical damage. And they may, for instance, it's very common for the PLCs, the programmable logic controllers, to actually have a physical network port on them that you can plug into. But once again, those teenagers would have to be teaching themselves ladder logic in their spare time. And I've seen it's a level beyond where I would expect teenagers to necessarily be able to get to without a lot of hands-on experience.
and Dan, what do you think about the sort of physical attack?
Well, I think as an industry, we're pretty experienced with the threat posed by the average teenage delinquent surrounding a rural water system tank without a fence, right? That problem has existed for as long as we've had water system facilities. I don't want to imply that all water systems are prepared to handle that kind of threat. Some of them do a very good job at that, and some of them are less prepared for that. So that isn't necessarily new. And as an industry, I think we're relatively mature in dealing with that. The bigger threat is the stuff that we haven't thought of yet that's enabled by the cybersecurity component now of the vital parts of our operation. And I think what at least many people I talk to, and certainly I'm in this category too, when we think of a cyber threat and damaging a water system, you tend to think of the obvious and the big ticket items, like stopping pumps, draining a tank, injecting too many chemicals. We tend to think of the things that touch our operational mittens every day. But there's a whole raft of things where there's vulnerabilities that we haven't thought of. For example, how about affecting the meters so that our billing is compromised? And we no longer have an accurate record of how much water we've sold, how much we've consumed. We don't have a basis for collecting rates, and you can slowly drive the water system into a financial problem because they're unknowingly collecting less revenue than they're supposed to. So there are attack vectors that are separate from the actual cyber attack that affect operations in ways we really haven't thought of. And those are not likely to be perpetrated by the average teenage delinquent. So, I think Twyla's question there is one that I think we've all thought about as an industry quite a bit. And those don't bother me so much. It's the ones that we haven't thought of yet because there are so many new things associated with it and we're just not aware of them. Those are the ones that keep me up at night.
Yeah, and Mark has some questions about ICS and SCADA systems, and I think we're going to get there here in a little bit. So let's talk about the new guidance, and then when we get to talking about more of this, security beyond that, we'll get back to Mark's question about ICS and SCADA systems.
Yep.
Mike,
let me take that when we get there, because I
yeah,
have a number of things to say there.
Yep.
yeah, Mike, why don't you talk about the new guidance? We'll go back.
Okay,
To
so this is a memo from the EPA, and what it says is, you've always been doing these sanitary surveys, and now as part of that, there's this new requirement to incorporate a review of cyber resilience. And the tool that they have provided for this is what's the word? Lamity, lame. It's really it is so surface scratchy. I looked at it. I don't think it provides any value at all. It's okay, EPA, if that's the data you think you need to collect, okay. They call it a risk assessment tool, but it's you're answering questions very simply: yes, no, don't know. And what it says is that the assessment must be conducted by EPA or the state, which seems odd to me. But it's interesting. It's really a self-assessment. I don't know that anybody from the state is required to actually conduct this, but it will give you a report and a remediation roadmap. You need to fix the following things, which is pretty straightforward. Do you have this control in place? No. Part of your roadmap is to put that control in place. So I think they've tried to make this as simple as they possibly can, and as a result, I think they're trying to gain some momentum in establishing this as part of now the routine battle rhythm, and
so
it will probably get more complex with time.
So I mean, you called it lamity, lame. Is the report and remediation roadmap not good?
Well, I didn't fill it out because I don't have a water utility, and I just kind of diddled around with the pull downs. It seems pretty straightforward what it would do, but no, I didn't see that.
So,
and I believe the report is kind of an executive facing report too, that you can use to take up to leadership and say, here's the report and here's why I need budget for these gaps to be filled.
And you said that in some states are resisting. Go ahead, Bjorn.
I did take a look at, so there's an Appendix A in the guidance that they sent out evaluating cybersecurity during public water system sanitary surveys. In Appendix A, it lists what the questions are, and they're pretty straightforward things. It's like, do you require approval before new software is installed or deployed? Do you have like Microsoft Office macros enabled? Do you maintain an inventory of all of your IT and OT network assets? Are you collecting logs? It's basic stuff. It is table stakes. It is not an end-to-end security program.
Yeah.
And so, now I want to get to Mark's question about, his question is, one would think that water ICS and SCADA would not be connected to the internet. And if not connected to the internet, where are the vulnerabilities? So 2 questions, Bjorn. One is, are those kind of questions in this new guidance and questionnaire? And number 2, what's the answer to his question?
So this questionnaire does not make the assumption that these systems are completely disconnected from the internet. In my experience, and I've looked at about 30 or 40 different water systems across Washington state at this point, and I have seen a mixture. The less secure the less sophisticated water system operators are oftentimes using a mixture of communication technologies to access their remote sites. And oftentimes, for convenience, these operators have left pathways for themselves to access these sites remotely from home. This may sometimes involve, a like private dedicated line that runs to the site. But oftentimes I have seen that the water system operator is literally using like RDP or manage engine or something like that to like just remote into the machine across the internet from their home computer, as in not one that's owned by the water system, but their actual home PC. So I have absolutely seen a disturbingly large number of water systems that are directly connected to the internet. I have seen chlorine injectors that are managed by a cloud service that is not even part of the water system, that the water system itself had even forgotten was in place. And I pointed at this thing that said, cloud on it, and it was a chlorine injector. I was like, what is this? And like, oh, we thought we had taken that out. So that's one example. Another example is even if you have a relatively secure and fenced off OT network, there is still usually a pathway for IT administrators to remote into it to do software updates and that sort of thing. And there are a variety of ways in which you can compromise the IT employee's computer and then use that as a gateway to access the OT network when they enter it to do maintenance. Then there's the third and most dangerous approach. I would say a lot of the most sophisticated water systems that I have dealt with are now using private cellular APNs. That is a private cellular network that is not connected to the internet, and you need to have a dedicated SIM card that has the authentication keys to access that network. But here's the kicker. This stuff is all still administered by Verizon or AT&T. So to get a new SIM card for your private cellular APN, you call Verizon or AT&T. What's something that a lot of hackers have started doing lately? Social engineering large telecom companies to get access to things that they shouldn't, whether it's the accounts of famous people or whether it's redirecting text messages or if it's ordering a new SIM card. So one of the things that I tell water systems to watch out for is like watch your monthly bills and talk to the phone company like at least once a month and make sure that nobody has added additional SIM cards to your account via social engineering. Just calling the operators up at Verizon and talking them into sending you a new SIM card is the sort of thing that the Lapsus gang that was big in the news last year or two.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly their modus operandi. That's how they got into Okta, the
T-Mobile.
and T-Mobile. Yeah, T-Mobile.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you're on AT&T FirstNet or Verizon's first responder network or whatever else, and that's where these private APNs usually live, in theory, the most secure part of those telecom networks. In reality, you can absolutely talk your way into getting a SIM for somebody's private APN if you know enough information about the water system operator to pretend to be them.
And would that facilitate, an actor in the middle attack?
Yeah. So
Right.
that would allow a threat actor to get on the network to potentially, both deploy exploits against PLCs and against the controller workstation and the historian. There's a lot of things that you could do as soon as you were on that network, because it's
Yeah.
assumed that in the case of an air gap network, it's assumed that nobody gets on there unless they're supposed to be there.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about the remote telemetry and the ability to, have it overpressurize a piece of pipe by just feeding it bad information, and using basically their own remote telemetry radio system, over the cell network to do that. It seems trivial to me.
They don't even need to do that. There's a number of vulnerabilities that have come out in the last couple of years. Siemens S7 1500 PLCs are one of the most
Mm-hmm.
common PLCs out there. And there was a vulnerability that Clarity, the research firm, discovered 1 or 2 years ago that essentially allowed complete remote code execution. You could arbitrarily rewrite the firmware on the PLC to do whatever you wanted, up to it including bricking the PLC itself. And here's another thing that people aren't thinking about. The time to back order a Siemens S7 1500 right now is, from what I've been told by a controls vendor in the last couple of weeks, looking at 14 to 16 months. If the
Wow.
threat actor goes and pastes all 400 of the PLCs on your OT network, that means that you're going to be without them for 14 to 16 months unless you have 400 of them in stock on site already. So
Wow.
you can lose your controls entirely for a very, very long time right now.
hmm So, and Mike, so getting back to this, we talked about the new guidance here. It may not happen.
It may not happen. That's right. Right. So because a couple of states are suing the EPA because when and so this is my assumption, and if anybody wants to set me straight on this, I'm happy to listen, but my assumption is the reason that they are complaining is because the EPA just created an unfunded mandate for private sector rural operators, because public sector operators under this kind of thing generally have other funding mechanisms. For example, the state local cyber grant program that's going on right now, um, public sector water operators are fine to tap that grant. And so when they created this mandate, you must report on this. First of all, it doesn't seem like such a big deal to fill out this, self-serve questionnaire, even if the state's got to help you do it or the EPA's got to help you do it. It's not a heavy lift. So I'm not entirely certain what they're complaining about. I think it's just because of the concept of an unfunded mandate. You're telling them something that they're going to have to do, and it's going to cost something, and you're not providing any funds there. So now, if the states prevail, what I talked about when I said that there was a lot of activity right now in the sector specific agencies where they are extending through the rulemaking process the existing regulatory purview, all that could come to a grinding halt if these states prevail. Because Health and Human Services came out and said you must use the NIST cybersecurity framework from this point forward when you're doing your HIPAA risk assessments. Pipelines, aviation, rail have all gotten new guidance, and there's no stop to that from what I can see, unless something like that lawsuit gets in the way. So we're going to have to watch that. So because some states are suing, Congress, a couple of people in Congress have said, okay, well then let's solve that problem and let's bust out another $7.5 million. Add that to the $25 million that's actually used in this USDA program called the Circuit Rider program, and that would help these organizations. And I don't know how far $7.5 million would go, but if the scope is narrow and we're talking about private sector rural operators, that $7.5 million might go quite a ways. And so we don't know if this is going to pass, but here is so there's a lot of weird balls in the air right now. EPA says you got to do this because all the sector specific agencies are getting on board, extending the rules. A couple of states said, no, we don't want you doing that. Somebody from Congress says, okay, well, let's bust out some money to help that happen. All this could fail in any one of these places, and all of a sudden, all this becomes moot. So the question is, what really is the message for water operators right now?
And I
Right?
mean, but I mean, I think the thing that everybody's paying attention to is what you said before, which is NIST, right? I mean, with the White House, the federal cybersecurity strategy saying everybody focus on NIST.
Yes. Well, and so that's another component of this is the national cybersecurity strategy. That's exactly what it says. Well, here's NIST doing their NIST thing, coming up with this is something they say they're going to do, and right now it's in the comment process. What does that mean? This is 2 years away. It's clearly 2 years away. But what they want to do is come up with, a reference architecture to show water operators, here's the way to put these pieces together. And notice what they want you to focus on: asset management, exactly what is on your network and how is it being kept, free of vulnerabilities; data integrity. And that's the part that I talked about, where this actor in the middle and fooling the SCADA system, right? Fooling the industrial control systems into thinking that some measurement is what it is when it's actually not, right? That's the way the Stuxnet thing worked, where we made the centrifuges go out of control in Iran. Well, this is how you can overpressurize a pipe, for example. and remote access, which has been the bane of everyone's existence. Remote access is being pillaged all over the world. What's the new one? The Zoho Manage engine by the group in China that hit Guam really hard recently. I forget what they call them, cyclone something, whatever. And network segmentation, making sure, per the previous discussion, that your industrial control systems are segregated from other networks that have access to the internet. We like to think of it as air gap, but to Bjorn's point, and I'm sure with respect to Dan's experience, you got to have some kind of remote access in there. So, all of these things together, asset management, data integrity, remote access, network segmentation, those are the high places right there. So even without NIST waiting 2 years to actually come out with this, they're telling you what the important parts are. So I think that's an interesting thing to tease out of this piece, along with the fact that NIST is working on this and it's quite a ways out.
And
But
Dan,
Dan's
I was going to
earlier
say, yeah, go ahead, Bjorn.
to Dan's earlier point, I don't see anything on here about de-automation, which is what Idaho National Laboratories has been recommending. And for that, I would hand it over to Dan.
Yeah.
Well, and that's true. I mean, Idaho National Labs, their approach generally has been you can't keep a bad actor out. So you should assume they're in the system right now. And the only solution to that then is to make sure that they can't do any harm. So stop trying to keep them out. That isn't going to work. And instead make sure that when they're there, they can't do any harm. And basically what their approach has been, and they seem to be more and more aggressively pushing this position, is de-automate. So anything that doesn't have to be automated, don't make it automated. And those things that have to be automated, have a backup or have another pathway that's a physical process that can act as a guardrail or a set of bumpers on the automatic process. An example of that would be in the Oldsmar situation with the caustic soda pump, is simply don't size that pump large enough to be able to create a problem. So if it goes full scale or full injection, it doesn't create a public health or safety concern. That as a strategy doesn't seem to be embedded in the NIST plan or what came out in the EPA memo. And so there's a possibility that from the regulatory side of this, there's still more to come, still more work to do, possibly even a change in direction that we might see.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with that. And I think, again, that the super simple assessment methodology that they're giving the water operators is to get them warmed up and into this kind of battle rhythm of reporting, some kind of assessment results just to get them used to it. And I think you're right. There's going to be additional things coming because what they've said so far, I don't see it moving any needle, except for being able to allow the government to aggregate across the spectrum of water utilities where there may be systemic problems that need to be addressed. I don't see any other value in it than that. I mean, honestly.
The scenario that I keep expecting is that eventually there will be an incident that results in lives lost. And that sort of incident will likely form a casus belli to ram actual regulation of this problem through Congress on the basis of national security. Because, once people are actively dying to attacks like this as opposed to near misses like we've seen thus far, and I do feel like it's pretty inevitable that at some point a water system will get hit badly enough for lives and or property to be destroyed on a significant level and with a significant recovery time in the not too distant future. I'd say within the next few years, that's pretty likely to happen. And when that happens, I think that we're going to see the vehemence with this regulation is being pushed, and the urgency, and even the level of stakeholder buy-in for it going up pretty rapidly and pretty fast.
And Mike, and Mike, you put this slide together as a strategy for folks. Can you go through it?
Yeah. So, I mean, just kind of looking at everything. So, first of all, that's a fascinating conversation going on there, and I kind of wanted to talk about that. But it's not likely that NIST is going to finish this new reference architecture anytime soon. And Congress may not pass that 7.5 million, and the states may prevail in dissuading the EPA and other sector specific agencies from going down that rulemaking process, in which case we're left with this scenario that Bjorn just described, which is management by landmine, right? When something happens that's so bad, all of a sudden regulation is going to fall out of the sky. Um, so, um, in order to get in front of that and potentially to be able to tap some of the funding that's coming along. So right now in Washington State, and everybody for the most part is in Washington State. Hello, Fullerton, California. Um, the state and local cyber grant program application process has started, and it needs to be finished by July 18th. So clock's ticking, and it's a fairly straightforward process and a template to fill out to request grant funding. If you have conducted some kind of assessment and you have gaps and risks that you have identified, that can be used as the justification for your grant requests. If you have not done something like that and you're not prepared or won't be prepared by the 18th to fill out this application form, the thing to go for is that assessment, because the state local cyber grant program is a 4-year program, and the funding levels change every year. So this year there is about $3 million set aside. Next year it's going to be about $5.6 million. So smart money is, if you haven't done some kind of assessment already, that's the thing that you want to ask for. You want to ask for funding for that assessment, or you just want to, foot the bill yourself. And remember that this grant program, you got to go out of pocket on it, and then they reimburse you 90% because there's a 10% cost share. But if you want to request funding for an assessment and then use that to produce your risk assessment, a good one, not a lame one, a corrective action plan, the gaps that you need to close, and budget estimates to close those gaps. And then next year in fiscal year 23, when $5.6 million is available, you are ready to go. I need this, 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 and this. Here's the justification for it. Here's how it lines up with the expected outcomes of the grant program. Here's how it lines up with state requirements, et cetera, et cetera. Do your justification. That's smart money. So you can
And
justify that in next year's grant request. There, if the circuit rider thing happens, it gives you a mechanism to ask for funds from there.
And Mike, if even if people don't get the grant money, they should still do an SCSF assessment, or they should do an AWIA. What's the recommendation here?
Well, I think everything, tying this to the national cybersecurity strategy and where all the other sector specific agencies are going, it stands to reason that everybody is going to converge on the NIST cybersecurity framework. And version 2.0 is coming out soon, and it's got a new focus area for governance. And I know that is a big thing that everybody's starting to push a little more strongly. It's not just your technical controls; it's your how do you govern this in your organization. So it's coming.
And the AWIA risk and resiliency assessments they don't provide a lot of direction. They're not very prescriptive. They're more asking you to report out on things that you think are risks, rather than specifically telling you what kinds of risks to look for in detail. The AWIA risk and resiliency assessment will ask you, what cyber threats exist to the transportation of water in your system. The NIST CSF will ask you specifically what things are you doing to control access to that network in terms of monitoring, authentication and authorization, people, processes, and a whole bunch of other areas as well. So I would definitely be focusing on NIST's work here.
And I would second what Bjorn said. You can port the NIST work into the AWIA requirements.
Yep.
You can't necessarily go the other direction. I think anecdotally, a short story, in all of the risk and resiliency assessments and the emergency response plans we conducted, we generally got to a point where we had finished our work and we had made an assessment, generally in concert with CI Security, about the risks to the network. And we would anecdotally ask the system operator or the maintenance manager, that person who is probably most aware of how the system operates. With all that work being done and with all that said, how would you break the system? And they always had an answer to that wasn't included in the previous work we had done. My point being is that there's reason to believe that a deeper dive on these assessments will produce fruit, because it seems that there are vulnerabilities and there are ways to impact operations that are not cookbook. They're not covered overtly in the regulations and the published steps, and that there is probably an advantage and benefit to be had by treating each one of these as not formulaic, in concert with either the NIST guidelines and regulations or the AWI guidelines and regulations, but by somebody like CI Security coming in and looking at the specifics of that system and how the configuration may be vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of those with folks, and one of the interesting larger stories here is, as the feds have said, "Hey, everybody, we want you to align with NIST CSF," crosswalking it to all sorts of different things, whether it be in healthcare, AWIA, or all of that, has become a very frequent conversation for us. Um, Mike, you want to go through NIST CSF here?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about it. So the reason that this makes a good choice is because the federal government, and I forget what the executive order was, but Obama administration, in executive 13363, something like that, said, "Hey, NIST, we want you to come up with a standard of practice that can be implemented by any size organization in any sector." And so the way that they did this, and this is super smart, it's outcome based. It's not prescriptive. It doesn't say have this control in place. It says make this thing happen. And so depending on the size and the resourcing of your organization, how you do that is up to you. And I mean, you can do a lot of this can be hand roll. But you hit these 5 focus areas, right? So identify, right? You need to know what's on your network. And that was one of the things that they were talking about that NIST wanted to address in their new reference architecture, is how you manage your technology footprint that you have. And then there's protect. That's the application of preventive controls, firewalls, email filtering, blah, 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 blah. Detect, how you monitor your network for signs that prevention has failed. And you need to manage the impact, right? You got to try and turn that into a tree falling into the forest as much as you can. It's okay to clean up a workstation that got malware. It's not okay for the FBI to call and say all your data is for sale online, or have your organization completely stop operating. And then there's respond, obviously, get in front of that, squash it, and recover, come back to full operational capability. So that's those 5 focus areas. And then there will be a 6th being added to version 2.0 of the NIST framework, which is coming out soon. The comment period ended on May 31st, Jake? May 31st.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it should be coming out soon. And it's got this extra section for governance, because all kinds of sectors are now saying it's not good enough to throw all this at your IT people and have them responsible for implementing all these technical controls. You folks that manage the organization, the executives, the C-suite, right, the commissioners, you have to be informed and in the loop, and this needs to be reported to you, and you need fingerprints on decisions made about risk. And that is starting to be louder and louder. So the NIST framework is a super good choice. All the sector specific agencies seem to be going this way at the direction of the federal government. This is the one that was built for purpose. And so this is the one that we get a lot of use out of with our customers.
There is one other NIST document that I would really recommend looking at, and that's NIST 800-82, which is a set of guidelines for securing operational technology and SCADA networks specifically. There are considerations that OT network operators need to be thinking about that are not considered part of the NIST CSF because it's a level beyond what most organizations need to consider in terms of their security. When NIST does finally come across with its guidelines, they're probably going to be a combination of the NIST CSF and NIST 800-82, plus some other stuff that we have no idea about right now. So it's worth taking a look at 800-82 for that reason, but also there's just a lot of detail there that you wouldn't get from the CSF itself. Jake, I think you're muted.
Oh, look at that! I sat on my cord and it unplugged. I was saying
what did you say then?
No, I was saying as we get towards the end of our slides here, I mean, there is a question about NIST CSF because it's come up in a bunch of places, which is right now, Bjorn, our have water systems been aligning themselves with NIST CSF, or is it completely new? I know cities and counties have.
This would be new to them, I think.
New.
All new. Okay. All right. Well, I mean, so the one thing that, I'll say is, we can certainly help you with that. And, as the guys said here, that is definitely something, a place you want to go. With, as you think about your assessments for this year. Some important things. Number one, don't forget to sign up for Mike's IT security news blasts on our website. Sign up for it. We do security awareness training every other week. And of course, you can sign up for all of our regular panels. And, and we'll go to some final thoughts here. We'll start with Dan, then Bjorn, then Mike. And our email addresses are up there. If you have questions for us, let us know. Obviously, if you're watching live, you can put it in the chat. If you're watching online, if you're watching on YouTube or something, you can email us there. And before we get to final thoughts, my colleague Ginny is going to put a survey in the chat. For every one of our webinars, we put out a survey. We want to know how we did. Was this helpful? Was this not helpful? What could we have done differently? So please take the survey. Also, everybody who fills out the survey, we donate to a charity called the Society for Information Managers, and they do a fantastic job training people up. And also in that survey is a way you can contact us. Again, doing that NIST CSF is something that all water systems should be thinking about this year. All right, Dan, final thoughts.
I guess one thing I would add is something to possibly just keep your eye on. The Alderwood Water and Wastewater District, in conjunction with Idaho National Labs, is designing a new pump station using a new approach. So they're integrating the consequence-driven cybersecure awareness principles that are being pushed by INL. They're designing this pump station so that it can be automated, but be secure from attack or impact if it is hacked. And so these are some cutting edge processes, some cutting edge design ideas, a whole new approach to design. They're probably a year away from having that process completed. But what they learned from that may have broad application in the rest of the industry as it relates to this topic. So just kind of a heads up that I think Alderwood is kind of pushing the boundaries here with a pump station design. And we may have information to share 6 months or 12 months from now about how that's coming and kind of what we've learned from that exercise.
Awesome. Good. Bjorn, final thoughts?
Well, my first thought is I would be fascinated to, hear what comes of that and what you learn. My other thoughts are can kind of be summarized as it is possible to do everything right and still lose. You can have built the most secure water system ever designed, and some clever person will eventually think of a way to get through it. This is a truism in information security, and has been through the history of computing. Essentially, there is no system created by human beings which cannot be broken by a sufficiently well-resourced and dedicated and sophisticated threat actor. So no matter how well protected your system is, how thorough your controls are, there will still come a time when those controls fail. And so having multiple redundant controls, having an ongoing process of improvement around looking for risks that need to be managed and getting out in front of them before they become a big thing, all the parts of a really mature security program really are necessary to protect you. And that is something that is not going to come from this sanitary survey checklist. This sanitary survey checklist is the most basic. It is the minimum set of things that you must be doing in order to feel defended at all. It is not what will actually keep you safe. So take that for what it is. It's kind of an opinion, but I think that it's one that bears out in reality.
All right, Mike.
Over to Mike.
All right, Mike. Final thoughts.
So final thoughts are these: the guidance coming from the EPA is surface scratchy and confusing, and it's not clear that it's actually going to hold. Right, this lawsuit from these states may prevail, and all this becomes nothing. However, it does appear that infrastructure disruption is on the radar for us. And I care a whole lot more about my drinking water and my flushing toilet than I do about whether or not I can turn a light on. I'll just say I know what's going to kill me the quickest. So while there is grant funding available, get yourself assessed, understand what your gaps are, get budget estimates to go with that, and be ready to apply for funds when they're available. There's funds available now. Get in front of that. If you do it the way the EPA told you to, which again may not end up being the system of record, you're going to scratch the surface, and it's a compliance checkbox. Get serious about it. Get yourself assessed, get a corrective action plan, and get to work.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate having you here. Don't forget to take that survey, which I'll put again in the chat. We appreciate you joining us for all this.
Yep.
And, we'll follow up with an email that has the slides, that has the YouTube link for this. I see somebody's already asking for it. And let us know if you want to do one of those NIST CSF assessments. And if you want to get in touch with Dan, his email address is up there as well. On behalf of Dan and Bjorn and Mike and everybody here, have a great day. Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye, everybody.
Take care.